Wyoming Territory. October 1883. The train did not slow gently into Redstone Station. It arrived the way bad news arrives, sudden, loud, and final. Steam billowed across the platform in great white clouds. And when it thinned, what remained was a woman standing alone with a suitcase at her feet and a bundle of letters held against her chest. Her name was Nora Ellsworth. She was 25 years old. She had traveled 800 miles on a wooden bench with her knees pressed together so she would not crowd the man beside her because she had spent her entire life trying not to crowd anyone. The dress she wore had been let out twice at the seams and pressed 3 times before she left Ohio. It was the dress she intended to be married in. She looked up the length of the platform. It was empty, not quiet in the way a station is quiet between trains. Empty in the particular way a place is empty when someone was supposed to be there and chose not to be. A dog slept near the freight scale. A boy of perhaps 10 sat on a barrel at the far end, chewing a strip of dried apple, watching her with the careful stillness of a child who has been told something and is deciding whether to say it. Nora stood where she was and told herself the man was simply late. Wagons broke axles, horses threw shoes. A ranch 9 miles north of town gave a man 100 reasons to run behind schedule, and none of those reasons meant anything had gone wrong. She waited 3 minutes. Then she picked up her suitcase and walked to the boy. His face carried information he did not want to be the one to deliver. When she asked him if he knew a man named Vincent Ashby, something moved through his expression that had nothing to do with thinking. He slid off the barrel. He went around the corner of the depot building and was gone before she could ask anything else. The suitcase in her hand held everything she owned in the world. A few dresses, a Bible with her mother's name written on the inside cover, a tin of sewing pins, a small leather notebook in which she had kept accounts since she was 16 years old because numbers were the one thing she had always trusted. Numbers did not change their minds. Numbers did not write 31 letters promising to build you a room that faced east because you mentioned in your second letter that you loved morning light. She set the suitcase down between her feet and waited. The station door opened. A man came out wearing a station master's apron and an expression that did not suit his face, too careful to arrange the expression of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. His name was Fenn. He had ink on his knuckles and a green eye shade pushed up on his forehead, and he could not quite look her in the eye. He said her name. Then he stopped. From the far end of the main street, almost 2 blocks away, a sound drifted down through the October air. A fiddle, high and bright and cheerful, the unmistakable sound of celebration. And beneath it, faintly the sound of voices' laughter threaded through with the particular ease of people who have nowhere else to be and nothing to worry about. Nora turned toward the sound before Fenn said another word. She did not need him to say it. She had understood the moment she heard the music. The understanding arrived not like a blow, but like cold water, immediate total spreading through her until she felt it in her hands. She said steadily, "That is his wedding." Fenn said, "Ma'am." "How long has the town known?" He was quiet for a moment that answered the question better than words could have. Then, "A fair few of us knew, ma'am. I'm sorry. Ashby's a man who likes an audience. He likes to be the only one walking away clean." She heard what he was telling her. The cruelest part of it, the part that would sit in her chest for a long time after, was not the wedding itself. It was what the wedding required. They had let her come. The entire town had known. They had stood in that church and watched Vincent Ashby put a ring on another woman's hand, while the woman he had been writing to for 7 months was on a train that would set her down 2 streets away. They had let her step off into it. They had let her ask a child his name. Not one of them had ridden out to flag the train. Not one had sent a wire. They had let her come so they would have something to talk about at supper. Nora Ellsworth picked up her suitcase. "Which direction?" she said. Fenn pointed reluctantly toward the church. Of course it was that direction. Everything in this town was that direction. She started walking. Each step required a decision. Not because she felt strong, she did not feel strong. Because she understood with the cold clarity that comes after a certain kind of shock that she had nothing left to lose. When a person has nothing left to lose, it turns out they can walk quite steadily. The laughter got louder as she approached. It had names attached to it now. She could hear individual voices rising above the general noise, and then above all of them, she heard one laugh she recognized. A big carrying sound, the sound of a man delighted with himself. She knew that laugh because he had described it in a letter. He had written that folks said he had a laugh you could hear across a hayfield, and she had read that sentence by candlelight and pressed the page against her chest like a woman who had never been given something to hold. She had been a fool. She knew it now, but she had been a fool. The way lonely people are fools, not from stupidity, but from wanting, and wanting is not a crime, and she would not apologize for it. The wedding party spilled out of the white-clappered church into the afternoon. And there he was. Vincent Ashby stood on the church steps in a brushed coat with a flower pinned to it. One arm around a woman in a borrowed veil, his hat tipped back. His face lit with the particular gladness of a man who has gotten exactly what he wanted at no cost to himself. He was handsome in the way that handsome men often are, as though the world had been easy on him because of his face, and he had simply never been asked to develop anything else. He saw her. She watched it happen. She watched his eyes find her across the distance and recognize her and make a decision in the space of a single heartbeat. He looked away. He said something to the man beside him, and they both laughed, and the new bride laughed, because they were laughing not knowing or not caring to ask what the woman who had stopped in the middle of the street had to do with anything. A ripple went through the crowd as people noticed her. Heads turned. Two women near the church steps exchanged something behind gloved hands. One of them, a woman in a yellow dress with a voice that carried, looked Nora up and down in the slow, deliberate way that some people look at things they have already decided about, and then said, not bothering to lower her voice, "Lord, is that what he was writing to?" Her companion said, "Hush, Edna." Edna did not hush. No wonder he traded up. The laughter that followed was not the honest laughter of people who find something genuinely funny. It was the other kind, the rehearsed kind, the kind that announces itself, the kind that is meant to be heard by a specific person standing in a specific spot. Nora stood in the road and let it come down on her. She had stood in rain like this before. Not this exact storm, but storms enough like it that she knew the only rule: you did not run. Running told them they had hit something. You did not cry. Crying gave them the rest of the story. You stood and you breathed and you made your face into a wall and you waited for it to be over. Then she said his name. She did not shout it. She said it at a normal volume, and somehow it cut through the fiddle and the laughter and the afternoon noise because it was the only quiet thing in the middle of all that sound. Vincent Ashby's shoulders went stiff. He turned around slowly, a smile already arranged on his face. The smile of a man who has decided in advance to be charming and reasonable and make whatever this was into something that was not his fault. "Nora," he said warmly, as if she were a pleasant surprise. "Now I did mean to write you. You wrote me 31 times, she said. The crowd went quieter. They thought perhaps she was being amusing. She was not being amusing. "You wrote that you had built a room onto the house facing east," she said, "because I mentioned in my second letter that I liked morning light. You wrote that you were a God-fearing man who had buried one wife and never expected to love again until my letters came. You wrote that you would be standing on the platform with your hat in your hands." Her voice did not rise. It went in the opposite direction. The quieter it became, the stiller the crowd grew around it, leaning in without realizing they were leaning. "You signed every letter," she said. "Yours only, yours." Vincent Ashby's charm had a certain reach, and she had just walked past it. Something shifted in his face, the arranged smile staying in place a moment too long before it recalibrated into something harder and less careful. "A man's circumstances can change," he said. "When—" She took one step toward him. "When did your circumstances change, Mr. Ashby?" "Before or after you received my wire from Denver telling you the day and hour of my arrival? Before or after I sold my mother's sewing machine to purchase my ticket?" The street had gone almost entirely quiet. Even the fiddle had stopped, though she had not noticed the moment it happened. The new bride had drawn back a half step from her husband and was watching his face with an expression that was not yet understanding, but was moving steadily toward it. "You knew the day," Nora said. "You knew the hour. You stood in that church and spoke your vows, knowing I would step off that train 2 streets away and walk straight into it." She paused 1 beat. "You wanted me to see it. A man who likes an audience." That landed. She saw it land in the slight tightening around his eyes. What came back was uglier than she had expected. He gestured at her, at all of her, the full length of her, with one careless hand, the way you gesture at something that has disappointed you. And his voice had the carrying quality of a man who has decided to win this in front of witnesses, regardless of what it costs him to do so. "You came 800 miles on the strength of some letters," he said. "Did you truly believe—" He let the gesture complete the sentence for him. Someone laughed. Edna, in the yellow dress, laughed loudest, delighted, drinking it in the way a person drinks something they have been waiting for. Nora stood in the road and felt something go out of her. Not her dignity, she had decided in the first 30 seconds that she was keeping that whatever the cost. What went out was smaller and more private. A particular warmth she had been carrying since the first letter arrived 7 months ago. The warmth of believing that perhaps this time a man had chosen her soul before he saw her body, had read what she could do and found it sufficient, had written 31 letters, not as a transaction but as an honest reaching toward another person across a winter of distance. That warmth went out. She felt it leave. The place it left behind was cold, but the cold was almost a relief because it was honest. She looked at Vincent Ashby one last time. Then she looked past him slowly around the full half-circle of watching faces. The 2 women, the men with their thumbs in their belts. Edna, in yellow, still pleased with herself. Fenn, the station master at the back of the crowd, with his eyeshade in his hands, looking at the ground. The boy from the barrel, who had crept all the way across the street and was watching with his mouth open and his dried apple forgotten. Nora said quietly, but clearly enough for all of them, "I hope every one of you remembers this day." She turned. She picked up her suitcase. Her arm was shaking beneath her coat, but she held the case as though it weighed nothing. And from across the street, from a direction she had not been watching, a voice she had not heard before said, "I expect I will, ma'am." It was a low voice, unhurried. It had no laughter in it at all. Nora stopped. A man was leaning against the corner post of the Mercer Trading Company across the street, where he must have been the whole time, with one boot crossed over the other and a coil of new rope hung over his shoulder. He was tall, not the exaggerated tall of a man who wants you to notice, but the practical tall of a man who has spent years doing work that required reach. Dark hair under a dust-pale hat. A face that the sun and the years had been working on for a long time, with a jaw that suggested patience was not the same thing as softness. He was not looking at Nora. He was looking at Vincent Ashby, and there was nothing in the look that could be mistaken for warmth. He pushed off the post and came down off the boardwalk into the street with the easy movement of a man who has made a decision and is simply carrying it out. "Mind yourself, Callum," Vincent said, and there was something new in his voice now. A careful note that had not been there a moment before. The man, Rafe Callum, she would learn, came to a stop in the middle of the road between Nora and the church steps. And he was not a loud man. But when he stood there, the space around him changed in some way that was difficult to name. Everyone else seemed to get quieter just to make room for him. "I've been standing here 10 minutes, Ashby," he said. "And in that time I watched a woman come 800 miles on your word. I watched her step off a train into something you built on purpose so your friends could have themselves a laugh. And then I heard you point at her like she was livestock you thought better of buying." He let that settle over the crowd. "I've been trying to recall a lower thing I ever saw a man do," he said, "and I confess I'm coming up short. This is my wedding day," Vincent said. "Then I'd go enjoy it." Rafe's voice did not change in pitch or temperature. "What you cannot do and stay a man is invite a woman to her own humiliation, arrange the entire production in advance, and then stand on your church steps and mock her in front of the people who helped you do it. He turned and looked directly at Edna Ferris in the yellow dress. "I knew your mother," he said. "She would have taken a switch to you for what came out of your mouth just now." Edna went red. She went quiet. Both happened at the same time. Vincent Ashby appeared to consider coming down off the church steps. He did not. Men like Vincent Ashby almost never do when the audience has gone quiet on them. He gathered what remained of his composure, took his new bride by the elbow. She pulled it half away from him, a small motion barely visible, but Nora saw it and turned and went back into the church. The wedding guests followed in twos and threes, eyes down, not looking back. The street emptied. Rafe Callum came across to where Nora was standing. He stopped at a respectful distance, a full arm's length, and reached up and took his hat off and held it against his chest in the manner of a man who understands that certain moments require a certain kind of acknowledgement. "Rafe Callum," he said. "I run a place about 9 miles north. Cattle, mostly." A pause. "I'm sorry for what happened to you this afternoon. There's no excuse in it, and I won't try to make one." Nora found she could not speak immediately. She had been bracing for impact for so long that she did not know what to do now that the impact had turned into a quiet apology and a held hat. In 25 years, no one had ever stepped between her and the laughter. Not once. She had always been the one who had to stand and take it because she had no father living, and no brother, and no husband, and no money. And the world was very plain with women like her about what they were and were not owed. "You didn't have to do that," she managed. "No, ma'am," he agreed. "Reckon I didn't." He turned the hat slowly in his hands. He looked up the empty street toward the church where, behind the white clapboard walls, the fiddle had started up again, thin and uncertain, as though it too was slightly ashamed of itself. "I expect you've got nowhere to be tonight," he said. It was not a question, and they both understood it did not need to be. The whole town had just watched the answer. "I'll think of something," Nora said. "There's no room in this town will take you tonight without half of them coming to look in the window," Rafe said. He said it plainly without cruelty. "And the other kind I won't name in front of you, so that isn't a real choice, and I won't insult you by pretending it is. I don't take charity." The words came out before she had fully decided to say them. She made herself soften them slightly. "I never have. I'll work for what I'm given, or I'll do without." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, too restrained for that, but the suggestion of one somewhere around the corners of his eyes. "That a fact," he said. "I keep accounts," Nora said. "I write a fair hand. I can cook for a crew without complaint, and I don't waste. I've been managing ledgers since I was 16 years old." She lifted her chin. "I am not asking you to pity me. I've had a belly full of pity from the man at the station. If you have honest work and a room with a lock on the door, I will earn my place in it, and you will not be sorry." Rafe Callum looked at her for a long, still moment. The kind of moment in which a man is actually seeing something, not just looking at it. "You came 800 miles to marry a man you'd never met," he said slowly. "Got made a fool of in front of a whole town inside 10 minutes of stepping off the train. And the first words out of your mouth to a stranger aren't 'help me.' There I'll work." He shook his head once, not in disagreement, but in the manner of a man who has just recalibrated something. "Harlan Ashby," he said, "is the dumbest man in the territory of Wyoming. And that is a competition with considerable entries." A small broken sound came from her left. The boy from the barrel had crept all the way across the street during the conversation and was standing at her elbow with his face screwed up against tears that were spilling anyway. The way a child cries when he has witnessed something he cannot make sense of and his body has decided to respond before his mind has caught up. "I'm sorry, miss," the boy said. "I'm the one that run and told him when the train came in. They gave me a penny." He scrubbed his face hard with the back of his arm. "I didn't know it was going to be like that. I swear I didn't know." Nora looked at him. This small, wet-faced child who had taken a penny and then stood at the edge of a crowd and watched what the penny had helped cause. She set her suitcase down and went to one knee right there in the dust of the street eye level with him and took both his hands in both of hers. "You listen to me," she said, and her voice cracked on it, and she let it crack because some things deserve to be said imperfectly. You did not do a wicked thing. You did a small thing for a penny the way children do. The wicked thing was done by grown people who knew exactly what they were about, and did it anyway. She squeezed his hands firmly. You remember the difference. Your whole life you remember it was them and not you. The boy flung his arms around her neck, and she held him. This stranger's child in this stranger's town, and over the top of his head, she looked up and found Rafe Callum watching her with an expression she could not fully read. Whatever he had decided 10 minutes ago when he pushed off that post, she could see in his face that he had just decided it again more firmly in some place that did not require further examination or debate. She set the boy back on his feet, stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. You'll get a name to your name taking me on, she said quietly to Rafe. They'll talk about the kind of man who takes in the woman who was jilted in the street. They'll talk regardless, Rafe said. Folks out here talk the way other people breathe. I stopped minding it some years back. He bent and picked up her suitcase before she could reach it, swung it up under one arm with the coil of rope over his shoulder, as though carrying both was no different from carrying either. Wagons this way, he said. Nora Ellsworth stood one more moment in the place where her imagined life had ended. Then she squared her shoulders, not in defeat, but in the manner of a woman who has looked at what is in front of her and decided what comes next, and followed the only man in Redstone who had thought she was worth crossing a street for. The wagon ride north was 9 miles of silence, and Rafe Callum did not try to fill a single mile of it. That was the first thing Nora understood about him. Vincent Ashby had filled his letters with words, pages of them, charm stacked carefully upon charm warmth constructed so precisely that she had mistaken the architecture for the real thing. This man drove with the reins loose in one hand and his hat pulled against the late afternoon sun and said nothing at all. Somewhere around the 4th mile she understood that his silence was not coldness. It was a form of consideration. He was giving her room to come apart if she needed to with no one watching. She did not come apart. She sat with her spine straight and watched the road unwind through dry grass and pine-scattered hills, and she let herself feel the full weight of the day, for the first and only time, quietly with no audience. Then she set it down deliberately, the way you set down something heavy when you understand that carrying it further serves no purpose. You can put that on the seat, Rafe said, nodding at the suitcase she had clamped against her body. He said it without looking at her. It won't walk off the back of the wagon. I'm fine holding it. Suit yourself. A mile later, she set it down. When they reached the ranch, 2 men came out into the yard at the sound of wheels. An older man with white threading through his mustache, and the weathered patience of someone who has worked the same land long enough to stop being surprised by it. This was Harwick Peel, who managed the horses, and had spent enough years in the territory to read a situation without requiring it to be explained to him. And behind Harwick, a younger one, raw-boned and perhaps 19, who snatched his hat off a beat too late and stood twisting it in his hands with ears that had gone red at the tips. Rafe set the brake and came around to help Nora down from the high seat. He did it as though it required no particular thought. One hand under her elbow, steady and certain, setting her on the ground without ceremony or comment. Boys, he said, this is Miss Nora Ellsworth. She'll be keeping the books and cooking for the crew. She's owed the same respect as your own mother and a fair sight more than some of you have given to that standard. He looked at the older man. Harwick Peel pulled his hat off. Ma'am, horses are my department. He said it with the directness of a man who has decided the most useful thing he can offer is clarity about his function. The younger one followed a half-beat behind. Clem Wardlow, ma'am. His ears, already red, appeared to deepen in color. Gentlemen, Nora said. Harwick nodded at her, the way a man nods at a fact that has been established and requires no further discussion, and went to take the team. Clem stood twisting his hat in his hands until Harwick said something short and sharp, and he followed. Nora stood in the yard in the thickening dusk. The ranch spread around her, a long low house, a bunkhouse behind it, a barn with the smell of horses and dry hay coming from the open doors. Corral fencing running out toward the hills she could not yet see clearly in the failing light. Kitchen's this way, Rafe said. "Supper's cold by now. Harwick does for us when there's no cook. I'll warn you he can't." That first night, Nora lay awake in the room at the end of the hall with the key turned in the lock and the lamp out. She lay still and listened for footsteps, for the handle to turn, for the thing she had been taught her whole life to expect from men's kindness when it arrived at night in a house far from anywhere familiar. The handle did not turn. The floor creaked once, far down the hall, Rafe's boots crossing to his own room. Then the house went entirely quiet. She lay in the dark in a stranger's house and felt her heart slow down for the first time in 4 days. It slowed the way something slows when the danger it has been bracing against simply does not arrive. The absence of threat when you have been carrying the expectation of it long enough feels almost physical. She did not sleep for a long while. But the reason was not fear. The reason was that she could not stop thinking about a man who had stepped off a boardwalk into the middle of a public street for a woman he did not know, who had asked her one question and believed her answer without requiring further proof, who had picked up her suitcase and given her 9 miles of silence because he understood without being told that silence was precisely what she needed. She pressed the thought down carefully. She had been taught what this particular kind of hope cost. She had paid the full price of it once already this very day, and the receipt was still fresh. Numbers, she thought. Tomorrow you open the books. Numbers she could trust. In the morning she woke before the sun. She found the kitchen and the larder, and she went to work because work was the one thing in the world she had never been confused about. By the time the sky outside the small window had shifted from black to gray to the thin, bright gold of early October morning, there was coffee on the stove, bacon in the pan, and biscuits in the warming oven. She had also, in the same span of time, scrubbed the kitchen down to bare wood because it had not been properly cleaned in what appeared to be the better part of a year, and she could not cook comfortably in a room that was not clean. When Rafe came in from the first chores of the morning, he stopped in the doorway. He stood there for a moment in silence. "Harwick," he called back over his shoulder without taking his eyes off the kitchen. "Come look at this." The old man appeared in the doorway, then Clem crowding in behind him. The three of them stood and looked at the clean kitchen the way men look at something they recognize but cannot quite account for. "That's our kitchen," Clem said. "That's the same kitchen," Harwick said. "Sit down before it gets cold," Nora said. "And stop carrying on. It's a clean floor, not a miracle." They sat. They ate. Rafe had 4 biscuits and said nothing throughout, and she could not read his face at all. And she had decided he disliked the food when he put his plate in the wash basin without being asked, and paused in the doorway on his way out. "Miss Ellsworth?" "Yes." "Best biscuit I've had since my mother died." He put his hat on and went out. The door closed behind him. Nora stood in the middle of the clean kitchen with one hand pressed flat against her own sternum, feeling something settle into the space there. Something small and warm and dangerous in the specific way that small, warm things are dangerous when you have recently learned how much they can cost. She stood there for one moment, then she turned to the table. Rafe had left the ledger. He had set it down before going out. A battered thing, water-stained, its spine cracked from years of being opened flat on tables. 3 different handwritings across what appeared to be 4 years of accounts, none of them particularly careful. Nora sat down and opened it. She was not looking for anything specific. She was doing what she had always done, starting at the beginning, reading carefully, letting the numbers tell her what they knew. Numbers always knew something. Numbers kept records that people forgot they had made. She was on the 3rd page when she noticed it. A cattle sale. Previous fall, 40 heads sold to a buyer named in the margin only as Crane Agent. The price entered was low, not dramatically, not in a way that would immediately catch the eye of a man who hated paperwork and trusted the people around him, but low. Rounded to a suspicious neatness. And the count was off from the tally notation at the top of the page by 2 head. She turned the page. Another sale. Spring before that. 60 head count short by 3 from the range tally price again, just slightly below what a fair reading of the market that week would suggest. She turned further back. found another, and another, and another behind that one. She did not say anything. A woman in a man's house 3 days who accuses someone of thievery is a woman who finds herself back on the road by nightfall. She had learned long ago to carry what she knew quietly until she knew it whole. She began placing small slips of paper between the marked pages, and she kept reading, and the number assembling itself in the margin of her mind, the real total 4 years accumulated, was large enough that when she finally set her pen down and looked out the window at the afternoon light moving across the Wyoming hills, she sat very still with her hand over her mouth. Someone had been stealing from Rafe Callum for 4 years, carefully, consistently. Never enough in any single transaction to raise an alarm in the mind of a man who kept his own tally book but trusted others with the ledger. But across 4 years, season by season, in a hand that was not Rafe's and belonged to no one she had yet identified, the number was not small. She was still sitting with that knowledge when the sound came. It was evening by then, the sky outside gone to deep amber. The yard was quiet, and then the hoofbeats, not one horse, several. Moving at a deliberate walk, the careful, slow approach of men who do not want to be heard until they are already close. Nora went to the kitchen window. In the thickening dusk at the end of the drive, she could make out riders. 3 of them, perhaps 4, well mounted. The lead rider was dressed too well for a neighbor stopping by dark coat, expensive horse, the easy confidence of a man who has never arrived somewhere and been told to leave. She heard the front door open, heard Rafe's boots on the porch boards. She did not move from the window. The lead rider stopped at the gate. From this distance she could not make out his face clearly, but she could hear his voice, smooth as poured oil. Unhurried, carrying just enough warmth to make the threat inside it easy to miss if you were not paying close attention. "Callum," the voice said. "Hoped I'd catch you still up. My name is Douglas Crane. I believe we have some business worth discussing." Nora went very still at the window. She had just spent the afternoon reading that name in the margins of a ledger. Crane agent. 4 years of it. 40 head here, 60 there, the count always slightly off the price, always just slightly low. The difference always moving in one direction and one direction only. She looked at the open ledger on the kitchen table. Then she looked back out at the riders in the dark. And she understood with a clarity that arrived all at once that the conversation happening on the porch was not about a neighborly dispute. She understood that the man she had been hired to work for was standing alone in the dark, talking to the man who had been quietly emptying his life for 4 years, and that the man on the horse knew exactly what he had been doing, and that Rafe Callum did not. She pulled the ledger closer. She found a fresh piece of paper. She picked up the pen and began to write. Outside, the voices continued. Rafe's low and steady. Crane's smooth and patient, unhurried, the voice of a man who believes he has already won and is simply enjoying the interval before the fact is acknowledged. Nora wrote by lamplight with the careful precision of a woman who understands that what she is building right now is the only thing that matters. Her hand did not shake. Her numbers were exact. The story they told taken together was not complicated. It had simply never been read by anyone willing to look at it clearly. She heard Crane say, pleasant as a Sunday greeting, that he hoped Rafe would give the offer for the North Quarter some thought. Heard him mention that the country was hard, and that a man alone could find his luck turning in ways he never anticipated. Heard the patience in it, the unhurried quality of a man announcing an intention he has already decided to carry out, and is simply giving his subject the courtesy of advance notice. Then the hoofbeats moved away into the dark, and the night came back, and there was silence, and then Rafe's boots crossed the porch, and the front door opened, and she heard him stop in the hallway outside the kitchen. A long moment passed. "You can come out, Miss Ellsworth," he said from the other side of the door. "They're gone." She did not come out immediately. She looked at the pages spread across the table, the beginning of something, the shape of something taking form in ink and figures, and the quiet patience of 4 years waiting to be correctly read. "Mr. Callum," she said, "before morning, I need to show you something." She spread the ledger open on the kitchen table. Rafe Callum came through the door and stood in the lamplight and looked at what she had laid out. and his face was the face of a man who has not yet understood what he is looking at, but can tell from the way it has been arranged that understanding it is going to cost him something considerable. Nora did not ease into it. She had decided in the minutes between hearing the riders leave and hearing his boots on the porch that the only way to tell a man he has been robbed for 4 years is to tell him plainly. Men like Rafe Callum did not want cushioning. They wanted the truth laid flat on the table where they could see the whole shape of it. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She started at the beginning. The first entry she had flagged, fall of the previous year 40, had sold to a buyer listed only as Crane Agent Price, entered at the figure in the ledger count at the margin note. Then she opened his tally book, the small leather notebook he kept in his coat pocket and had left on the table that morning. She laid it beside the ledger. "Your tally says 42 head," she said. "The ledger says 40. Your tally puts the market rate that week at $1.10 per head. The ledger entered it at 90 cents. She moved her finger. "Spring before that. 60 head, 3 fewer than your own count price, again below market." She turned pages. Here and here and here, one after another. The paper slips she had placed throughout the afternoon marked each entry a trail of small flags running backward through 4 years of careful, patient theft. Rafe did not speak. He watched her hands moving across the pages with the focused stillness of a man absorbing damage and deciding what to do about it. "Total across 4 years," Nora said. She slid the fresh page of figures toward him. "Every transaction I could find matching this pattern. The number at the bottom is conservative. There may be more I haven't reached yet." He looked at the number. His jaw set, his hands flat on the table curled slowly into fists and then deliberately flattened again, a man exercising control over himself with visible effort. "The man on the horse tonight," he said. "Douglas Crane, the same name in every margin. And the hand that wrote it." "That is what I don't know yet," Nora said. "It is not your hand. It is consistent across all 4 years, which means it is one person with repeated access to this ledger, someone you trusted near your books." Rafe was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind had come up, moving through the pine brakes north of the barn, with a low, persistent sound like something breathing steadily in the dark. "How long did you spend on this today?" he said. "Most of the afternoon." He looked at her across the table, not the inventory look she was accustomed to from men, not the up-and-down assessment that calculated her value by what it could see. He looked at her face, and only her face, with the directness of a man reading something he intends to remember accurately. 3 weeks from now, you'd have had the complete picture," he said. "I have most of it now." 4 years, he said. "I never—" He stopped, tried again. "I hate paperwork. Always have. I keep the tally because a man has to know his own count, but the ledger—" He shook his head slowly. "I trusted whoever was nearest to it." "I know," Nora said. "That is exactly what someone counted on." She left him with the ledger that night. She went to her room and lay in the dark and thought about what she had observed at the breakfast table that morning. Something she had not mentioned to Rafe because she was not yet certain enough to name it, and because certainty in matters like this was the difference between justice and the destruction of an innocent person. Clem Wardlow was 19 years old. He had red ears and an uncertain manner, and a habit of asking Nora the names of things in the kitchen as though cataloguing them against some future need. What was a parsnip? How did you know when bread had proofed? Why did you add the salt after and not before? He was not a complicated person to read, which was precisely why what she had seen that morning troubled her. When Rafe had set the ledger on the table and mentioned offhandedly that he had been meaning to get his accounts properly organized, Clem had gone still, a brief stillness, a fraction of a second the kind a person might miss if they were not already watching. But Nora had been watching because Nora had been reading people since childhood, the same way she read numbers, looking for the places where the figures did not quite add up. The stillness was wrong. Not guilty wrong in a simple way. Something more complicated than simple guilt. Something closer to the specific fear of a person who has been keeping a secret they cannot sustain and has just heard a sound that might mean it is ending. She turned it over in her mind for a long time before she slept. In the morning, Rafe went out early. Harwick Peel went with him to look at the north fence before the ground froze. The yard went quiet. The kitchen held only Nora and the smell of coffee and the silence of a house with one person in it who was trying to decide something important. Clem came in from the bunkhouse at 7:30. He took his usual chair and accepted his usual cup and began eating with the mechanical focus of a young man using the activity of eating to avoid the activity of thinking. Nora sat across from him and waited. She poured her own coffee. She looked out the window at the frost on the ground, already beginning to release in the thin morning sun. She let the silence do what silence does when it is given enough room, expand, fill the space, make the absence of words louder than words. Clem set his fork down. "Ma'am," he said. "Yes." He looked at the table. His jaw worked once. "I reckon you found something in those books yesterday." "I found several things." His hands around the coffee cup were not steady. He was 19 years old, and he was frightened, and she could see both of those facts very clearly. And she let herself see them because what came next was going to require her to hold on to them. "Clem," she said, keeping her voice even. "I am not going to accuse you of anything. I am going to ask you one question, and I would like you to answer it honestly, because I think you have been carrying something for a very long time, and it has gotten too heavy, and I think some part of you came in here this morning knowing that." He looked up. "How long has Douglas Crane had your sister?" The color left his face entirely, and so quickly that she thought for a moment he might go off the chair. He gripped the edge of the table. His mouth opened and closed, and then a sound came out of him, a single brief, involuntary sound, the sound of a person who has been holding a door shut for 2 years against enormous pressure and has just felt it give way. Then the words came. All of them. The way words come after a long, terrible silence, not carefully, not in order, but in a flood that does not pause for breath or sequence. Her name was Willa. 14 years old now, which meant she had been 12 when it started. Their parents had died in the fever winter of 1880, both of them within 3 weeks of each other, and there had been no one. No family within 1,000 miles. No money beyond what the land had been worth, and the land had a lien on it that Clem had not known about and could not have paid regardless. Douglas Crane ran a boarding house in Caldwell, 12 miles southeast of Redstone. It was the kind of establishment that called itself a boarding house because calling it what it actually was would have invited a level of official attention it could not sustain. He had taken Willa in on the grounds that their father had owed him a debt Clem was now entirely certain had been fabricated from nothing numbers on paper with no foundation in any transaction that had ever actually occurred. That had been the spring of 1881. Willa had been in that house for 2 years and 4 months. Crane's arrangement with Clem was straightforward in the way that arrangements built on terror are always straightforward. Clem would write the cattle numbers the way Crane told him to write them. He would adjust the prices the way Crane directed. He would do this every season reliably without variation, and in exchange, Crane would keep Willa in the kitchen, cleaning, cooking, washing, not upstairs. He said it was just numbers, Clem said. His voice had the flat quality of someone reciting something they have said to themselves many times in the dark. He said no one would get hurt. He said it was a business arrangement, and I'd be doing the right thing for my family. And if you stopped, Clem's throat moved. He was specific about it. He explained exactly what would happen, step by step. Nora sat with that for a full moment. She let it settle completely before she responded, because the thing that had just been placed on the table deserved the weight of being entirely understood before anyone attempted to move it. Then she got up from her chair, came around the table, and sat down on the floor directly in front of Clem Wardlow. Not beside him. In front of him, so he had to look at her. She took both his hands in both of hers. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "You have been carrying this alone for 2 years. A 19-year-old boy trying to keep his little sister alive with the only currency he had, which was another man's trust. You did not come into this house this morning to eat breakfast. You came in because you had decided somewhere in the night that you could not do this one more day. And that decision, the decision to sit down in front of me and not run, that was not weakness." She held his hand steadily and let him look at her. "That was the first brave thing you have done since this started. And you stopped being alone the moment you made it." Clem Wardlow, who was 19 years old and had the raw-boned frame of someone who had grown up too fast, doing work that was too hard, put his face in his hands and wept. Not quietly. With the full, exhausted grief of someone who has not allowed themselves this particular release for a very long time, and whose body, having finally been given permission, was not interested in moderation. Nora held his hands and let him. She heard Rafe's wagon in the yard before she heard his boots on the porch. She heard the specific quality of silence that a man produces when he has opened a door and seen something he did not expect. She looked up. Rafe Callum stood in the doorway. He had come back from the fence early. She could see in his face the moment of recognition, the open ledger on the table, Clem in the chair with his face in his hands, Nora on the floor holding him. His expression moved through several things in rapid succession. Then it settled into something hard and very still that she recognized as the face of a man managing something extremely powerful with great care. She stood up before he could speak. "Before you say anything," she said, "you need to hear this the way I heard it, all of it. He wrote in my books." Rafe's voice was flat and quiet, and more dangerous than if it had been loud. "He has a sister," Nora said. "She is 14 years old, and Douglas Crane has had her locked in that boarding house in Caldwell for 2 years and 4 months. He has been threatening that child's safety over this boy's head since the spring of 1881. Every wrong number in your ledger was the price Clem paid to keep his little sister out of the rooms upstairs." Silence. "Now you look at him," Nora said. "You look at him and you tell me what you see." Rafe looked at Clem. Clem had taken his face out of his hands and was sitting upright in the chair, red-eyed, braced for whatever was coming with the resigned stillness of someone who has long since stopped expecting things to go well for him and is simply waiting to find out how badly they will go. The silence in the kitchen lasted long enough that Nora became aware of the fire in the stove and the wind outside and the faint sound of Harwick moving around the yard. Then Rafe Callum crossed the kitchen. He did not go to the table. He went to the chair where Clem was sitting, and he crouched down in front of it, the way a man crouches to look a frightened animal in the eye, slow and deliberate, and without any suggestion of threat in his body. "Clem," he said, "look at me." The boy looked up. "How long?" Rafe said, "Has that child been in that house?" 2 years come spring," Clem said. The words were barely audible. Rafe's jaw worked. Something moved through his face, not the hardness that had been there when he came through the door, but something older and more complicated. The look of a man reassessing his own failures alongside everyone else's. "You should have come to me," he said. 2 years ago. I was scared." Clem's voice broke cleanly on the second word. "I'd only been here 3 months. I didn't know if you'd..." "I know it." Rafe's hand came down on the boy's shoulder, heavy and certain. "Being scared is the most natural thing in the world when a man like Crane has got his hand around someone you love. You were a frightened kid trying to keep your little sister alive with the only thing you had." His grip tightened. "But you're not alone anymore, you hear me? That girl is coming out of that house. I give you my word on it, and I have never in my life given my word on something I could not carry." Clem looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and looked down at his hands, and the set of his shoulders changed in a way that was difficult to name precisely, as though something that had been wound too tight for too long had been given just enough slack to breathe. Nora turned to the stove and busied herself with coffee she did not need to make, because her face was doing something she preferred neither of them to witness. Harwick Peel appeared in the kitchen doorway at some point and stood there long enough to read the room without requiring explanation. He took his hat off and held it. "Been watching that boy go hollow for a year," he said. "Should have asked sooner." He put the hat back on. "Tell me what needs doing." The 4 of them sat at the kitchen table that afternoon and assembled a plan. The most important plans Nora had found were rarely complicated. Complexity was what people added when they did not trust the simple thing. Clem would ride to Caldwell on Friday as usual, deliver the false counts as usual, show nothing different in his face or manner, because he had been doing this for 2 years and was practiced at it in the way that people become practiced at things they hate through sheer repetition. Crane had no reason to think anything had changed. Rafe would leave for Cheyenne on Monday morning to find the federal marshal who rode circuit out of the territorial capital, a man named Garrett, whose reputation for straightforwardness Rafe trusted. While Rafe was gone, Nora would continue building the case. Every transaction, every discrepancy, every thread traced back to its origin laid out in language clear enough for a judge to follow without assistance. It was near the end of this conversation, when the plan had taken its shape and the coffee cups had gone cold, that Clem said something that stopped everyone. He was looking at the column of company names Nora had been compiling, tracing where money and land had moved after Crane acquired them. 3 families had lost their properties in the county over 4 years. She had written out the name of the holding company that appeared to have purchased the Osler family ranch after Crane took it. Clem went still in a way that was different from his earlier stillness. "That name," he said. "What about it?" "That's the name on the letter." He looked up slowly. "The letter Crane keeps in his strong box. Separate from everything else, locked, separate from his other papers. I saw it once when he had me carry something to the office. The letter has a seal and a name printed across the top." He tapped the page. "That name, right there." Nora looked at the name she had written. A holding company registered in Cheyenne, 2 words that had appeared as the ultimate recipient of everything Crane converted to cash or property. She went still. She crossed to the shelf where she had placed her suitcase, opened it, and removed the bundle of 31 letters tied with red string. She carried them to the table and untied the string and went through them one by one, looking for a specific letter. She remembered it vaguely, a letter in which Vincent Ashby had been uncharacteristically specific about his previous life in Cheyenne, painting himself as a man of business and consequence before he came to Wyoming. She had found it somewhat tedious at the time and moved on. She found it. The 11th letter, written on paper with a printed letterhead, the name and address of the company he had kept accounts for in Cheyenne he had written before deciding to try his hand at something more straightforward out in the territory. She placed the letter on the table beside the page where she had written the holding company's name. The same 2 words, the same address. The kitchen was very quiet. Nora sat down. She placed both palms flat on the table because she needed something solid under her hands. She thought through what this meant in the correct order without letting the shock of it compress the reasoning into something she might later find was wrong. Vincent Ashby had not found her name in a matrimonial agency catalog the way a lonely man finds a name. He had gone looking. He had known from her own letters to the agency letters in which she had described herself honestly, including the fact that she had been keeping accounts since she was 16 and had a particular facility for finding errors in financial records, that she was precisely the kind of person who could destroy what this company had been building in Wyoming. The plan had not been to find a wife. The plan had been to find a threat and neutralize her. Court her, marry her, bring her to a ranch 9 miles from town, and ensure she spent the rest of her life making biscuits and keeping the books of a man who was already under the company's control, never knowing what she was looking at, never having cause to look. And then Vincent Ashby had seen a girl in a borrowed veil and made a decision for which no one in Cheyenne had given him permission. He had discarded his assignment in a public street because he was vain and because it had never once occurred to him that the woman he was throwing away might be the thing they were all actually afraid of. And in doing so, he had delivered her to a man whose books she had every reason to open and no reason to stay quiet about what she found. Rafe said her name. Quietly, she had been silent long enough that the silence had become its own kind of statement. She looked up. "Vincent Ashby," she said carefully, "did not choose me from a list. He chose me because in my own letters I described what I could do with a ledger. I was not a prospective wife. I was a prospective problem." She touched the 2 pieces of paper side by side. The company he worked for sent him 800 miles to court and marry the one woman in the territory who might eventually understand what they were doing. Nobody spoke for a moment. He threw that away. she continued, because a girl with a narrow waist walked by. He abandoned his assignment, the most important thing his employers had sent him to do, because he was vain, and it had never once in his life occurred to him that the woman he was discarding might actually be the thing they were all afraid of. Harwick, from the far end of the table, said quietly, "Lord Almighty." Clem was staring at her. "They know about you, ma'am. If they find out what you've been doing with those books." "They will find out," Rafe said. His voice had gone to iron. "Crane came here once already to see whether I was ready to sell. When I don't sell and don't fold, he'll come back with something more deliberate." He looked at Clem. "And if he has any means of knowing what's happening inside this ranch," Clem went pale. "He asks me," he said. "When I ride in with the counts, he asks how things are going, whether anything's changed at the place." He pressed his eyes shut briefly. "I told him you'd taken on a bookkeeper. I told him her name. I didn't know what she'd find." "When did you tell him?" Nora said. "That first Friday after you arrived. He asked after the ranch, and I said Rafe had taken someone on to do the accounts." Clem opened his eyes. "He asked if anything was new at the place. I said Rafe had business in Cheyenne next week." He stopped. His face fell. "I said it before I thought. I'm sorry. I didn't know it mattered." Which meant Douglas Crane had known for 2 weeks that a woman with a head for numbers had arrived at the Callum Ranch and been given access to 4 years of ledgers, and had known that Rafe intended to go to Cheyenne. Rafe stood. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room looking at the dark yard, and was quiet. "I leave for Cheyenne Monday," he said finally. "Nothing changes before then. Clem, you ride Friday as planned. Same numbers, same face, same conversation. Nothing different, not one thing." He turned back. The moment Crane thinks something has shifted, the first thing he does is use what he holds. He did not say Willa's name. He did not need to. "And when you return with the marshal," Harwick said. "When I return," Rafe said, "we move." Nora looked at the papers spread across the table. The ledger, the flagged pages, the 2 documents with the same name written on them in different hands. The beginning of something that was not yet finished, but was getting there. She pulled a fresh sheet toward her. "I'll need more lamp oil," she said. "I'll be working through the nights." The days that followed had a particular texture, the texture of people carrying knowledge carefully, the way you carry something fragile across uncertain ground. Clem rode to Caldwell on Friday and came back before sundown, whole and unchanged. Crane had asked after the ranch with a specific brand of casual curiosity that is not casual at all. He had mentioned, smiling, that a man ought to keep better track of who he let near his private papers. Clem had smiled back. He had been doing this for 2 years. He was very good at it. Saturday and Sunday. Rafe moved through the property, doing the things a man does before leaving a place for several days. Checking horses, going over fence lines, talking with Harwick about what needed watching. He said nothing to Nora about his departure that felt like farewell, because he was not that kind of man. Monday morning, before Rafe's horse had cleared the north gate and his outline had disappeared into the gray pre-dawn light, Nora put on her coat and went to find Reverend Oakes. She had been thinking about this since Saturday, working through it from every direction, looking for the weak points. The weak point was Marshall Garrett. She did not know Garrett. She knew his reputation from what Rafe had told her, a few sentences honestly delivered. But reputations were assembled by the same process that assembled everything else, through the interests of the people doing the assembling. A man with the kind of reach that Senator Aldous Merritt appeared to have could reach a considerable distance, and whether he could reach a federal marshal was not a question she felt comfortable leaving to chance. The alternative was not to go around Garrett. It was to go above him entirely. Reverend Oakes made his circuit on Mondays. He drove an old wagon with a gray mule and moved between the small settlements and homesteads west of Redstone on a route that carried him 2 days later into Cheyenne for the Thursday evening service near the federal courthouse. Nora had spoken with him 3 times at the Lutheran services Rafe drove her to in the valley. She knew his route. She knew he was a man of uncomplicated honesty. The kind that does not require effort, because it has never met the kind of temptation that corrupts it. She gave him a sealed package. Inside were 2 complete copies of everything she had compiled, written in her clearest hand, organized chronologically with a cover letter addressed to Federal Judge Cornelius Fitch at the Territorial Courthouse in Cheyenne. She gave Reverend Oakes the judge's name and the address. She told him it was urgent and confidential and that she was trusting him with something that mattered to the safety of people she cared about. Reverend Oakes asked no questions. He took the package, placed it in the inside pocket of his coat, and drove his gray mule west. She told no one. Not Clem, not Harwick. She did not tell them because 4 people sharing a secret were 3 people more than a secret needed in order to stay safe. And Clem in particular had been frightened for 2 years in a way that left traces in a person's face whether they intended it or not. Then she went back to the kitchen and continued building her case, and she did not speak of it again, and she waited for Rafe to come home. Wednesday came and went. He had said he expected to be back Wednesday evening, 2 days to Cheyenne, a day to find Garrett, and make the case 2 days back, allowing for weather. Thursday morning. No rider from the North Road. Thursday afternoon, Harwick found reasons to remain visible in the yard. Clem saddled his horse twice, and both times Nora said his name quietly from the kitchen doorway, and he unsaddled it again. Friday morning arrived with a gray sky carrying the smell of coming snow, and still nothing from the direction of Cheyenne. By Friday afternoon, the atmosphere in the house had become its own presence, a 5th person that nobody named, and everyone accommodated, moving around it carefully, keeping their sentences short, finding tasks that kept hands occupied and minds from going to the places they wanted to go. Nora was at the kitchen table with the lamp burning in the gray afternoon when she heard the horse. Not from the north, from the direction of Caldwell. One rider, coming fast. The speed of someone who has decided to arrive before they have time to reconsider the decision to arrive. She went to the window. The rider came through the gate at a gallop and pulled his horse down hard in the yard and was off it before it had fully stopped. It was Clem. He had not been scheduled to go to Caldwell today. His face as he ran across the yard toward the house was arranged in a way she had not seen before, not the fear she had learned to recognize in him, but something past fear, something that arrives when a person has been afraid so long they have burned through it and reached whatever is on the other side. She was at the door when he reached it. He had an envelope in his hand. She took it, looked at the outside. Her heart did something she did not allow to show on her face, because the handwriting on the envelope was the same handwriting that had signed itself, "Yours only." Yours across 31 letters over 7 months. She opened it. She read it once. Then she read it again, not because she had misunderstood it the first time, but because the second reading was the one that allowed her to think past what she was feeling into what she needed to do. Vincent Ashby knew about the trip to Cheyenne. He had known he wrote since the day Rafe rode out. They had eyes on the road. North had recognized Callum heading in the direction of the territorial capital, had drawn the obvious conclusion. Rafe Callum was currently a guest of Douglas Crane in Caldwell. He would remain a guest until Nora arrived that evening with the complete documentation she had been compiling. If she brought anyone, if she sent anyone ahead, if she held back a single page, then she could consider which of 3 people she would prefer to outlive. He signed it the way he had always signed everything. Yours only. Yours. Via Nora folded the letter once precisely and placed it inside the front of her dress against her skin, where she would feel the paper with every breath she took for the rest of the night. She looked at Clem, who was gripping the door frame with both hands. Then she called for Harwick. When the old man appeared, she went to the kitchen and took the small folding knife from the drawer beside the stove and put it in her coat pocket without comment. Harwick saw her do it and said nothing. She looked at both of them, the frightened boy and the weathered man, and said in a voice that she was pleased to find was entirely steady, "They have Rafe. Ashby wants me to come to Caldwell tonight with everything I've compiled. Alone." She paused one beat. "I am going to Caldwell tonight, and I am going to bring exactly what they are expecting to find in this bag." She crossed to the table. She picked up the working satchel she had been using to carry her document copies. She opened it and removed everything inside, every page she had written and every copy she had made, and set it all carefully in the center of the table. Then she began filling the satchel with blank paper from the shelf. Old feed receipts, the backs of envelopes, a 2-year-old invoice from a harness maker in Laramie. She worked quickly and neatly the way she did everything. Harwick looked at the satchel. "That bag is full of nothing." "Yes," Nora said, "that is precisely the point." She looked at Clem. "The real documents left this ranch Monday morning," she said. "Reverend Oakes carried them to Cheyenne. They are on the desk of Federal Judge Cornelius Fitch, and they have been there since Thursday morning." She said it without drama, the way she stated anything that was simply true. "Vincent Ashby believes he is summoning me here to hand him the only evidence against them. He is summoning me to hand him a bag of blank paper while I walk through his front door and keep him talking." Clem stared at her. "You knew? Before any of this happened, before Rafe was even taken?" "I sent it because I did not know this would happen, but I knew it might. I do not keep everything in one place." She closed the satchel and straightened. "Now, I need you to tell me everything you know about the inside of that house in Caldwell, every room, every door, where Crane keeps his strongbox, when the men drink and when they don't, and where they would put a man they wanted to keep available." Clem told her. All of it. The layout of the rooms, the kitchen entrance at the back, and which boards creaked on the outside steps. The habits of the men Crane employed on Friday evenings, which tended toward heaviness by 9 o'clock. The strongbox in the back office behind the false panel in the wainscoting, he described its location in the specific detail of someone who has memorized a place against a day they always believed might come. When he was finished, Nora looked at the two of them. "Here is what we are going to do," she said. The road to Caldwell ran southeast through country that did not care about human troubles. Nora sat on the wagon bench between Harwick and Clem and watched the darkness settle over the Wyoming hills and thought with the detached clarity that sometimes arrives when the time for planning has ended and the time for doing has begun. About everything that had led to this particular road on this particular night. 800 miles on a wooden bench. A sewing machine that had belonged to her mother. A street in Redstone and the sound of a fiddle, and a town that had made a production of watching her arrive into her own humiliation. And then a man who had pushed off a post and crossed the street and asked her one question and believed the answer, and everything that had followed from that single decision. She stopped thinking about all of it. Sentiment was not useful right now. Clarity was, and she had always been better at clarity than most people gave her credit for. The plan was simple. Simple plans were the only kind worth trusting because complexity was what people added when they did not fully believe in the simple thing. Nora would go through the front door alone, carrying the satchel of blank paper and old receipts the way a frightened woman carries something she has been ordered to bring close to her body. Arms tight, the posture of someone who has done exactly what she was told. Vincent Ashby expected a woman arriving in defeat. She would give him the silhouette of one for as long as it was useful. Clem would go around the back of the building to the kitchen entrance. He knew the door, knew which boards creaked on the outside steps, knew the habits of the man who usually sat nearby on Friday evenings. He would find Willa. That was his only task. Find his sister and get her to the door, and then out of it. Before they had left the ranch, Clem had pulled the lead deputy aside and described the back office with the false panel in the wainscoting where Crane's strongbox sat. He had described it in the exact detail of someone who has memorized a place against precisely this kind of need, and the deputy had listened without interrupting and said he understood. Harwick would position himself in the narrow alley that ran between Crane's establishment and the leather goods store beside it with the long rifle that he had produced from beneath the bunkhouse floorboards, with the matter-of-fact calm of a man who keeps tools for specific purposes and does not discuss them until the purpose arises. That was the whole of it. 3 people. 3 positions. One objective that contained inside it several smaller objectives that all needed to happen in the right sequence. They stopped the wagon on the dark edge of town beyond the last lamp. Nora climbed down without assistance. She straightened her coat. She adjusted the satchel strap over her shoulder and felt the weight of blank paper settle against her hip. Clem said her name low and urgent. She looked at him. He was 19 years old, and he had been carrying an impossible weight for 2 years, and he had found people willing to help him carry it, and in his face she could see the specific terror of someone who is afraid that the help will arrive too late, or not quite the right help, or that he will do something wrong and ruin it. "If anything goes wrong in there," he began. "Then you get Willa out the kitchen door regardless," Nora said. "That is your only job tonight, Clem. Everything else is mine." She looked at Harik. The old man had already checked the rifle. He nodded once and moved off toward the alley without ceremony. Nora turned and walked toward the lights of Caldwell. The town was not large. A main street with businesses on both sides. A few side streets running into darkness, the kind of place that existed because the surrounding land required services and the services required proximity. Crane's boarding house sat at the far end of the main street. A 2-story building with yellow light in the upstairs windows and a man leaning against the door frame at the entrance, smoking, watching the street with the professional inattention of someone paid to watch. He saw her from half a block away. She let him see her. Let him see the satchel and the pace of a woman who has been told what to do and has done it, arriving at the appointed hour with the appointed cargo. She let him perform his inventory as she reached the door up and down the assessment she had been enduring her entire life, and she met his eyes and said nothing and waited. He opened the door. The hallway beyond smelled of lamp oil and wood smoke, and something beneath both of those things that she did not attempt to name. A staircase on the right, a door at the end of the hall with light beneath it. The man gestured toward the door with his chin. She walked toward it. Her hands were steady. She noted this with the small, distant part of her that was always observing even in the middle of things, the part that had made her good with numbers, the part that stood slightly outside any situation and recorded what it saw without editorial comment. She pressed the door open. The room had been arranged as a kind of theater, the lamp placed to illuminate the center. 3 chairs positioned with deliberate intention, a table against the far wall, a window on the left with dark curtains, a door on the right that she calculated led to the back office where Crane's strongbox waited behind a false panel. Rafe was in the chair nearest the left wall. His hands were bound behind it. There was a bruise spreading dark along his jaw and a cut above his left eye that had bled and dried, leaving a dark track down the side of his face. His coat was gone. He was very still in the particular way of a man conserving everything against the possibility that he will need it later. When he saw her come through the door, everything in him that had been still lunged forward at once. The chair moved, the rope held. His voice came out stripped of every careful layer he usually kept over it. "No, Nora, no, you were not supposed to come. I told them I would sign whatever they wanted. You were never supposed to come here." One of the men in this room put a hand on Rafe's shoulder and pushed him back. Rafe went back. He was calculating. She could see him calculating behind the bruised eye, running the options, and she made herself look away from him because if she kept looking at him, her face would show Vincent Ashby exactly what this moment cost her, and she could not afford that. Near the cold fireplace stood a girl, 14 years old, small, made smaller perhaps by 2 years in a house that did not belong to her. A kitchen apron gray from washing, hair pulled back practically, hands at her sides not fidgeting. She had learned not to fidget. She had Clem's eyes, exactly the same pale gray, the same quality of watching from somewhere behind them, rather than through them, as though a younger version of herself had stepped back from the windows of her own face for protection, and had not yet found sufficient reason to come forward again. She was looking at the door, not at Nora. At the door as though she could see through it and through the wall and through the dark to the kitchen entrance and whatever she was hoping was coming through it. Nora did not let herself look at the girl for more than a second. By the window, Vincent Ashby was pouring himself a drink with the ease of a man at his own hearth. He had not changed since the church steps in Redstone, the brushed coat, the easy posture, the face arranged in the expression of a man who is pleased with how things have gone and sees no reason to hide it. "Nora," he said with the warmth of a man greeting someone he is genuinely glad to see. "You came, and alone as requested." His eyes found the satchel immediately. "And you brought your homework. Good girl." You said they would be released, Nora said. She kept her voice small and let it stay small. The man and the girl. You said if I came alone with the documents, they walk out. I said a great many things. He set the glass down and moved toward her unhurried. Let's see what you've brought first, and then we'll discuss the terms of everyone's evening. She held the satchel out. He took it, opened the clasp, reached inside. She watched his face. There is a particular expression that appears on the face of a person who has reached into a container expecting one thing and found something else entirely. It is not simple confusion. It is the gap between expectation and reality in the moment before the mind catches up to what the hands are reporting, a fraction of a second in which a great deal can be read by someone who is paying attention. What she read in Vincent Ashby's face was not just surprise. It was the first cold edge of fear. He pulled out a sheet of blank paper, turned it over, pulled out an old feed receipt from a harness maker in Laramie, reached in and found more of the same blank paper, old invoices, the backs of envelopes, nothing of consequence dressed up to fill the weight and size of something important. He looked up. She had taken 3 steps back while his attention was on the bag, and she was now standing in the center of the room with the heavy oak table between herself and him, and she was standing straight, and her hands were at her sides, and her face was not the face he had been expecting to see. Where is it? He said. 80 miles away, Nora said. On the desk of Federal Judge Cornelius Fitch in Cheyenne. It has been there since Thursday morning. The room changed. Not dramatically, nothing moved, no one spoke, but the quality of the air in it shifted in some way that was immediately perceptible to everyone present. Vincent Ashby went very still. You're lying, he said. I don't lie, Nora said. You know that about me. You spent 7 months reading my letters. I am many things this world finds inconvenient, but I am not a liar. You built an entire plan around that fact, around the certainty that if I found something in a ledger, I would bring it forward honestly, rather than suppress it. She tilted her head slightly. I brought it forward. I simply chose a different direction than the one you were watching. She took 1 step toward him, and he took 1 step back, and she was not certain either of them noticed this exchange in the moment it happened. You sent a man 800 miles to court me, she said, because in a letter I wrote to a matrimonial agency, I mentioned that I had been keeping accounts since I was 16. That was the threat, not my face, not my body, the thing in my hands. She held them up empty steady. You meant to marry me, and place me in a house 9 miles from town and ensure I spent the rest of my life looking at ledgers that would never show me anything you didn't want me to see. A careful plan, an expensive plan, a plan that required you to do one thing successfully. She stopped. She let the silence last exactly as long as it needed to. Instead, she said, you stood me up in a public street so your friends could laugh. You discarded the most important assignment your employers had ever given you because a girl in a borrowed veil caught your eye, and your vanity could not bear to take the plain one when the pretty one was available. She took another step forward. And then a rancher you had never thought about brought me home and put me in front of his books. Vincent Ashby had stopped pretending. The charm was gone the way a lamp goes out, not gradually, not with a flicker, but all at once, and what the absence revealed was smaller and meaner than what had been covering it. The documentation you supposedly sent to Fitch, he said. Even if you did, even if he read it, courts take time. Marshals take time. You're in this room tonight. Senator Merritt, Nora said. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water, and the ripples spread outward through everyone present. The letter in Douglas Crane's strongbox, she continued. The one with the senator's seal, the one that connects the holding company to a man who has spent considerable resources ensuring his name appears on nothing. That letter is described in detail in my documentation, which Judge Fitch received Thursday morning, along with 4 years of transaction records connecting the holding company to every piece of land it has acquired in this county through fraud or coercion. She paused. Your letterhead, Mr. Ashby, the one you used in your 11th letter to impress me, places you at that company before you came to Wyoming. I kept that letter. I keep everything. I believe I mentioned that to you once. Vincent Ashby looked at her for a long moment. Something went out of him slowly, the way air leaves something that has been punctured in a place not immediately visible. He reached for the pistol at his hip. She was already moving. She had calculated this, had known from everything she understood about men like Vincent Ashby that when the verbal architecture collapsed, the physical response would follow, because men who build their lives entirely on words have nothing left when the words stop working. She went sideways and down behind the heavy oak table in the same motion, and her hand went into her coat pocket where the small folding knife had been since she left the ranch. And she came up on the far side of the table, and she was behind Rafe's chair. The pistol discharged. The ball went through the space where she had been standing and struck the far wall, and the sound of it in the enclosed room was enormous and then gone, leaving a ringing absence behind it. Her hands were at the ropes behind Rafe's chair. She had put the knife in her pocket for this purpose and sharpened it 2 days ago in anticipation of exactly this need. The blade went through the rope in 4 cuts, her hands working entirely by feel, while her eyes stayed on the room, on Vincent crossing toward her, on the man near the door making his calculation. The 4th cut and the rope parted. Rafe Callum came out of that chair. He did not speak. He did not need to. He put himself between Nora and Vincent Ashby with the simple, total commitment of a man who has made a decision so fundamental it requires no further deliberation, and he moved toward the nearest threat with the efficiency of someone who has spent 34 years in a hard country and has no patience remaining for men who cause harm from positions of safety. It was brief, and it was not gentle, and when it was done, the man near the door was on the floor and Vincent Ashby was against the far wall with nowhere left to go. From the back of the building through the wall came the sound of the kitchen door. Clem's voice, high and fierce and cracking with 2 years of waiting compressed into a single syllable, "Willa!" And then the sound. Nora had been holding her breath for, without fully realizing it, a girl's voice, thin and startled and entirely real, saying her brother's name back to him in the dark. The girl by the fireplace was already gone. The door to the back hallway swung on its hinges, and Nora understood that Willa Wardlow had been watching that kitchen door since the moment Nora entered the room. And the moment she heard her brother's voice through the wall, she had not waited for permission or signal or rescue. She had simply gone the way people go toward the thing they have stopped allowing themselves to expect. Outside in the alley, Harwick Peel's rifle said one deliberate word to the man who came out the side door at a run. The man sat down in the alley and did not get back up. Vincent Ashby looked at the room around him, at Rafe standing between him and the door, at Nora in the lamplight with a folding knife in her hand, and an expression that was not triumph, something quieter and more final than triumph. At the empty space by the cold fireplace, at the satchel of blank paper and old receipts on the floor where he had dropped it. He bolted for the front door. He went through the hallway and through the entrance and out into the main street of Caldwell at a dead run, and he ran directly into the front rank of 12 Deputy United States Marshals who had been positioned at intervals along the street since 9:30 that evening. They were not Marshal Garrett's men. They were the men of Federal Judge Cornelius Fitch, dispatched from Cheyenne on Thursday afternoon, 4 hours after the judge had begun reading the documentation delivered to his chambers by a Lutheran circuit preacher on a gray mule who had understood enough of what he was carrying to ensure it arrived without detour. The judge had not sent a message ahead. He had sent men because he understood the difference between those two things and which one the situation required. Vincent Ashby was taken in the street he had tried to run down, still in the good coat he had worn to his own wedding 3 weeks before. Douglas Crane was taken from his bed on the 2nd floor of his own establishment within the hour. The back office was entered in the presence of 2 federal witnesses. The false panel in the wainscoting was located exactly where Clem had described it. The strong box behind it was opened. The letter inside, sealed formal bearing the name and office of Senator Aldous Merritt of Wyoming Territory, was removed with care catalogued and placed into federal custody before midnight. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, the long machine that had been quietly running in that county for 4 years was entirely dismantled, its components in irons or in flight. And the carefully maintained distance between Senator Aldous Merritt and every piece of dirty work he had ever commissioned had been reduced by one woman's 4 nights of careful work by lamplight to the width of a single sheet of paper with his signature on it. The aftermath had a different texture than the events that preceded it. Events had urgency and direction. Aftermath simply had weight. Nora stood in the long room after the marshals had moved through it and the immediate business of the evening had concluded, aware of a tiredness that was not entirely physical. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding a great many things together simultaneously and has now cautiously begun to set them down. Rafe came to stand in front of her. He looked worse in the lamplight than he had looked in the chaos of the last half hour. The bruise along his jaw had deepened, the cut above his eye had reopened, his shirt was dark in several places. He had been held for 2 days in a manner that was not comfortable. He was standing entirely upright, and his eyes were entirely clear, and she understood that whatever had been done to him had not reached the part of him that mattered. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, "You weren't supposed to come." "You've said that." "I told them." He stopped. The roughness in his voice was not entirely the result of 2 days of poor treatment. "I told them I would say whatever they wanted, sign whatever they put in front of me, because I needed them to keep waiting, to keep thinking there was still something to negotiate, because I needed you to be 9 miles away and safe." He looked at her steadily. "That was the only thing I needed." "I know," Nora said. "Then why?" "Because you stopped for me." The words came out without the careful steadiness she had maintained through everything that preceded this moment, and she let them come out that way because they were true. And the truth did not always arrive controlled. When the whole world was laughing, she said, "You crossed the street, you asked me one question, and you believed the answer without requiring proof or persuasion. You picked up my suitcase and gave me 9 miles of silence because you understood without being told that silence was what I needed. You gave me a room with a lock on it and a wage equal to what you paid your men and a ledger and the freedom to read what was in it." Her voice did not break. It simply lost the professional register she had been maintaining for days and became something more direct. Something that had been waiting for the moment when it was safe to be said plainly. "No one had ever stopped for me before, not once in my entire life. And when they put you in this house," she stopped, found the rest of it. "There was never one moment in which I was going to be the kind of person who does not stop for you. I would rather have burned to the ground in this building than gone home safe and spent the rest of my life knowing I had left the one man who ever thought I was worth crossing a street for." Rafe Callum made a sound she had not heard from him before, low and fractured from somewhere that did not usually allow its self-expression. His hands came up and found her shoulders, and he pulled her in against his chest, not gently, not with any of the careful management he applied to most things, but with the full weight of 2 days of fear and relief and something that had been building since a wagon seat and 9 miles of considerate silence. He held her the way a man holds something he has come dangerously close to losing without fully understanding he had it. Nora stood in the ruin of that terrible room and let herself be held by someone who had chosen her fully knowing exactly what she was. She had spent 25 years being too much. Too large, too plain, too capable in ways that made people uncomfortable, too unwilling to apologize for occupying the space she occupied. The world had spent 25 years trying to fold her down to a manageable size, and she had spent 25 years resisting, and she had been very tired for a very long time. She understood standing there in the broken room with the smell of gunpowder still in the air that the resistance had been correct, that the world had been wrong about her, that she had never been too much. She had been exactly enough. The world had simply been too small, and she had spent 25 years trying to fit herself into it, rather than waiting for the part of it that was the right size. She had found it. 800 miles from where she started on a ranch, 9 miles north of a town that had laughed at her in a kitchen with a locked door and a battered ledger, and a man who asked one question and believed the answer. In the kitchen at the back of the house, Clem Wardlow sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his sister in the circle of his arms. Willa Wardlow, who was 14 years old and had learned not to fidget and had spent 2 years and 4 months in a house that did not belong to her, had her face pressed against her brother's shoulder and was saying nothing at all. Just breathing. Just holding on to the fact of him, to the solid reality of his arms around her, to the proof that the thing she had stopped letting herself expect had arrived anyway. Harwick Peel appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at the two of them on the floor. He took his hat off and held it against his chest and stood there for a moment without speaking because there was nothing to say that the moment had not already said better. Then he went back outside to see to the horses. The federal proceedings occupied the spring and summer of 1884. Nora's documentation, the ledger analysis, the transaction history, the connecting threads traced from the first entry to the last, laid out in the clear and meticulous hand of someone who had been doing this work since she was 16 years old, was entered into the federal record and read aloud over 3 days by a court clerk with a steady voice. 3 families who had lost their properties in the preceding 4 years had their land restored by court order. The Osler family, who had believed their losses were the result of bad weather and bad luck and had spent 2 years grieving what they thought was simply the hard mathematics of the frontier. The Pemberton family, who had moved to Kansas and would now be moving back. A widow named Gatch, who had been told her husband's debts exceeded everything he owned, which was not true, and who received, along with her restored land, a formal acknowledgment from the federal court that the debt she had been told about had not existed. Vincent Ashby received 12 years in federal prison. He attempted during sentencing to deploy the charm that had served him well for most of his life. Judge Fitch had read 4 years of ledgers annotated in Nora's hand. The charm did not find purchase. Douglas Crane received 18 years. He provided substantial testimony against Senator Merritt in exchange for a reduction from what the prosecution had originally sought, and in doing so demonstrated the accuracy of something Nora had said in the long room in Caldwell on the night everything ended, that a man who has built his operation on other men's hands will sacrifice those hands without hesitation. The moment saving them becomes more expensive than letting them go. Senator Aldous Merritt was tried separately in a federal court in Denver, where his local influence carried considerably less weight. He was convicted on 4 counts and sentenced to 11 years. He released a statement through his attorney maintaining that he had been a victim of a corrupt subordinate's misrepresentations and had never had any knowledge of or involvement in the activities for which others had been convicted. No one who had read the letter from his strongbox believed this statement, including the newspapers that printed it. Senator Merritt died in federal custody in 1890. The newspapers reported this event briefly and without visible grief. Willa Wardlow came to live at the Callum Ranch in the autumn of 1883 and did not leave. The first month she slept with the lamp burning and her bedroom door standing open. She startled at sounds that did not warrant startling and was sometimes found in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, not because she was hungry, but because she could not stay in the room. And the kitchen was where the lamp was, and the lamp was where she needed to be. Nora did not comment on any of this. She simply ensured the lamp was always full and the kitchen was always warm, and that there was always something in the warming oven at 2 in the morning, because a person who cannot sleep should at least be able to eat. The second month, Willa began asking questions about the kitchen. How did you make biscuits rise like that? What was the difference between salt pork and side bacon? Why did bread need to rest after kneading, and what happened if you didn't let it? Nora answered each question fully, and without any indication that there was anything unusual about a 14-year-old needing to learn things that 14-year-olds generally already knew. By the 3rd month, Willa had taken over the bread entirely. She experimented with additions: dried fruit, a thread of molasses, once a handful of rosemary, from the kitchen garden that she presented to Nora afterward with a combination of pride and uncertainty that Nora recognized as the particular expression of someone who has recently rediscovered that trying things is allowed. The bread with rosemary was very good. Nora said so and meant it. And the expression that crossed Willa's face in response was something Nora filed away in the part of her memory that held the things she intended to keep. In the 6th month, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March of 1884, Willa Wardlow closed her bedroom door for the first time. No one mentioned it. Harwick Peel happened to be in the yard adjacent to the house when it occurred, and was observed by Clem walking around the back of the barn for no evident reason, remaining there for several minutes and returning with a neutral expression and something that might on a different face have been called moisture near the eyes, but which on Harwick's face was simply weather. Clem, when informed later that evening, sat down at the kitchen table and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a long moment. Then he said he needed to go check on the north fence. He went out and was gone for the better part of an hour. When he came back, he did not mention the fence. Harwick Peel told the story of the rifle in the Caldwell Alley to anyone who would stand still long enough to hear it, which turned out to be a considerable number of people. He improved the story each time he told it, which was his right, given that he had been there, and no one who had not been there was in a position to correct him. Edna Ferris. The woman in the yellow dress appeared at the Callum Ranch on an afternoon in October of 1884, nearly a year after the events in Redstone. She came alone, and she knocked at the door, and she had clearly spent some time preparing what she intended to say, because she said it with the careful precision of a person reciting something rehearsed. Nora listened to all of it, every word, without interrupting. Then she invited Edna inside and made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table for the better part of an hour. And when Edna left, she was still somewhat ashamed of herself, but measurably less burdened by it, which Nora considered a reasonable outcome for an afternoon's work. She did not forgive Edna because Edna had earned it. She forgave her because she had decided somewhere in the months since Redstone that she was going to be more generous than the cruelty she had received, and that this decision had nothing to do with the people who had been cruel and everything to do with who she intended to spend the rest of her life being. You could not carry the weight of other people's smallness and also move forward. The weight was too specific. It was calibrated to keep you exactly where they had put you. She set it down. That was all. She simply set it down. The land was hers now as well as Rafe's, her name beside his on the deed filed with the Territorial Land Office in January of 1884. Nora Ellsworth Callum recorded without comment by a clerk who wrote it down and moved on to the next document, which was all she had ever wanted from anyone with a pen and a piece of official paper accuracy without editorializing. A late afternoon in October, 1884. 1 year almost to the week since a train had set her down on a platform in Redstone, and the platform had been empty. The sky over the Wyoming hills was doing what it did in October, moving through colors that did not have adequate names, somewhere between copper and the deep blue-gray of distance, the horizon going luminous in the west, while the east had already decided on evening. The wind came across the grass with the clean, cold smell of coming winter, but it was not a threatening cold. It was the honest cold of a place that was exactly what it was and made no apologies for it. Nora stood on the porch and looked at it. She was not waiting for anything. She became aware of this gradually, the way you become aware of the absence of a sound that has been so constant you stopped hearing it. For 25 years, she had always been waiting for a letter, for a word, for someone to call her name out of a crowd with honest intent. Waiting had been the fundamental condition of her life, the thing underneath, everything else that shaped how she stood and where she looked, and how much of herself she allowed to be present at any given moment, because it was easier to be partially present than to be fully present and have it amount to nothing. She was not waiting. She was standing on her own porch, in her own life, looking at the country that was hers, and the absence of waiting was so complete and so unfamiliar that she simply stood in it for a moment and felt its shape. Rafe came out of the house behind her. She heard his boots on the porch boards, heard him stop beside her, heard him settle into the silence the way he settled into all silences, without resistance, without any impulse to fill what did not need filling. They stood together and watched the last light leave the hills. After a while, he said quietly, "Vincent Ashby is the dumbest man in the territory of Wyoming." Nora laughed. The real laugh, not the controlled version, not the polite version she had rationed carefully for 25 years, but the one that came from somewhere genuine and unguarded, the one that did not require permission or management or any consideration of how it was received. It came up out of her completely, and she let it. "You've said that before," she told him when it had finished. "I intend to keep saying it," he said, "at regular intervals, for as long as seems appropriate, which I expect will be some time." She looked at him. This man who had pushed off a post and walked into the middle of a street because something he was watching was wrong, and he was constitutionally unable to stand there and watch it. who had given her silence and a locked door and honest wages and a battered ledger full of 4 years of someone else's trust, and who had never once looked at her the way the rest of the world had always looked at her, as a problem to be managed, a size to be accommodated, an inconvenience to be worked around, who had simply looked at her face and believed her answer. "He could have had the bravest woman west of the Missouri River," she said. Rafe's hand found hers. His fingers were rough from 34 years of work that was real and necessary, and not performed for anyone's benefit, and they held her hand with the certainty of a man who has decided on something and sees no further need for uncertainty about it. "He handed her to me instead," he said, "and I intend to be grateful for his particular kind of stupidity every day I draw breath." The wind moved across the grass. The stars began in the east all at once, the way they always began in Wyoming, as though they had been there the whole time and were simply waiting for the dark to make them visible. "Love isn't the words," she had said to him in a room that smelled of gunpowder and broken glass. "It isn't the thing a man writes on fine paper by candlelight." She turned her hand in his and held it back just as certainly. "It is who crosses the street. It is who stays." She had traveled 800 miles and arrived somewhere she had never been, and found a life she had never imagined, and not 1 foot of the distance between where she had started and where she was standing now had been wasted. Every mile of it had been necessary. Every cold and difficult and humiliating inch of it had been pointing here to this porch, this sky, this hand in hers, this life that was entirely and irrevocably her own. The night came on full, and the stars multiplied across the Wyoming sky, and the cold settled around them with the clean honesty of a place that tells you exactly what it is, and neither of them moved to go inside because there was nowhere else either of them needed to be.